What's going on, everyone? Juan with the Mana Dorks, and today we have a game between Narset, Enlightened Exile, Rashmi and Ragavan, Miirym, Sentinel Worm, and Ixhel, Scion of Atraxa. Today we're going to tap right into the game. Thanks for watching. Let's get to it. Ryan plays an island as land for turn, and then taps that island to cast a turn 1 Soul Ring. Ryan then passes to Cory. Cory draws, plays a Crepulsian Forest as land, and then passes. Juan draws, plays a Storm-Carved Coast as land, which enters tapped and passes. Hunter draws, plays a Necroblossom Snarl, revealing a forest, which enters untapped and passes the turn. Ryan plays a Temple of Abandon as land for turn, which enters tapped, and he scries one to the top. Cory draws for turn, plays a Sulphur Falls, which enters tapped and passes to Juan. Juan untaps, draws, and plays a Plains as land for turn. Juan then taps 2 to cast a Talisman of Progress. With nothing else, he passes. Hunter draws, plays a Karn's Bastion as land for turn. Hunter then taps both of his mana to cast an Ichor Mirror and passes to Ryan. Ryan draws, plays a Mountain as land for turn, and then taps all of his mana, floating 1 colorless from the Soul Ring, and he casts his commander, Rashmi and Ragavan. Rashmi allows him to exile a card from an opponent's library when he casts a spell the first time during each turn. He creates a treasure, and then if that spell has a mana cost equal to or less than the amount of artifacts he controls, he can also cast that spell. With no other plays, Ryan passes to Cory. Cory untaps, draws, and plays a forest as land for turn. Cory then taps 2 to cast Nature's Lore, searching his library for Highland Forest, which enters the battlefield tapped. Cory then passes to Juan. Juan untaps, draws, and shocks in a Sacred Foundry, losing 2. Juan then taps out to cast Kaikar, Wind's Fury. When Juan casts a non-creature spell, Kaikar will create a 1/1 flying spirit token that he can sack for 1 red mana. Juan then passes to Hunter. Hunter untaps, draws, and plays a forest as land for turn. He then casts Contagion Clasp. When Contagion Clasp enters the battlefield, he targets Kaikar to get the -1/-1 counter, making it a 2/2. Hunter then moves to combat and swings the Ichor Mirror towards Ryan. Ryan declares his commander as a blocker, forgetting that the Ichor Mirror gets +2/+2 when blocked. This results in Rashmi getting 3 -1/-1 counters thanks to Infect. Hunter then passes the turn. Ryan untaps, draws, and plays a Mountain as land for turn. Ryan then taps 5 mana to cast Masterful Replication, which triggers Rashmi. Ryan decides to exile the top card of Hunter's library, which happens to be a Trailblazer Boots, and creates a treasure token. Replication then resolves and creates Ryan 2 3/3 Golem creature tokens. Ryan then passes to Cory. Cory untaps, draws, and plays a Rejuvenating Springs as land for turn, which enters untapped. Cory then taps 2 to cast Orb of Dragonkind, and then passes to Juan. Juan untaps, and during his upkeep, he taps the Talisman for a blue, losing 1 life, and he casts Opt. This triggers Kaikar, which creates a spirit token with flying. Opt then resolves, and Juan chooses to scry to the top and draw a card. Juan also draws a card for his turn, and then Juan plays an island. Juan then taps out to cast his commander, Narset, Enlightened Exile. When Narset attacks, Juan can exile a non-creature spell from a graveyard with mana value less than her power and cast it without paying its mana cost. Narset also gives all of Juan's creatures Prowess. Juan decides to sack the 1/1 spirit for red mana, and he uses that to cast Expedite. This triggers Kaikar to create another 1/1 spirit with flying, triggers Narset's Prowess, and targets Narset with Expedite, giving her haste. Juan then draws a card from Expedite and moves to combat. Juan declares Narset and Kaikar as attackers, Kaikar attacking Ryan, and Narset attacking Hunter. Narset triggers on attack, and Juan exiles Opt from his graveyard, casting a copy of it. This triggers Kaikar, creating a spirit, triggers Prowess, and Juan's creatures get +1/+1 until the end of the turn. Opt resolves, and Juan scries to the bottom and draws a card. Hunter declares no blockers and takes 5 commander damage from Narset, going down to 35 life. Ryan takes 2, going down to 36. Juan then moves to his end step and passes the turn to Hunter. Hunter untaps, draws, and he plays a Shine's Shadow Snarl as land, revealing a Plains, so it enters untapped. Hunter then taps 2 to cast an Infectious Bite. Hunter targets his Ichor Mirror and has it deal 1 damage to the spirit token Juan controls. In response, Juan sacks the spirit token Hunter is targeting for 1 red mana, and since Bite's target left the battlefield prior to it resolving, each opponent does not get a poison counter. Hunter then moves to combat and feeling a little salty, he sends the Ichor Mirror towards Juan. Juan declares no blocks and gets 1 poison counter. Hunter then passes the turn. Ryan untaps, draws, and then casts a Gilded Goose. On cast, this triggers Rashmi, and Ryan targets Cory to exile the top card of his library. The Goose resolves, and upon entering the battlefield, it creates a food token. Ryan then taps 6, sacking a treasure, and he casts Cory, the Swirling Sky, which was previously exiled from Cory's library. Ryan then remembers to create a treasure token from his commander's effect. Ryan then taps an island and sacks a treasure to cast Rise and Shine. He targets his food token, and makes it a creature, putting 4 +1/+1 counters on it. Ryan moves to combat and attacks Juan with both of his 3/3 golems. Juan decides to declare no blocks and takes 6 points of damage, going down to 31. Ryan then passes the turn to Cory. Cory untaps, draws, and plays a mountainous land for turn. He then taps out to cast his commander, Miirym, Sentinel Worm. Miirym will allow Cory to create a token copy of a non-token dragon that enters the battlefield under his control, and the token is not legendary. With nothing else, Cory passes to Juan. Juan untaps, draws, and plays a Sulphur Falls as land for turn, entering untapped since he controls an island. Juan then taps 6 to cast a Shark Typhoon. When Juan casts a non-creature spell, he will create a Flying Shark creature token with power and toughness equal to the mana value of the casted spell. The cast of Typhoon triggers Kaikar, creating a spirit token, as well as Prowess on all of Juan's creatures. Juan then moves to combat and declares Narset as an attacker, attacking Hunter. Narset triggers, and Juan exiles Infectious Bite from Hunter's graveyard. The cast of Bite triggers Typhoon, Kaikar, and Prowess. Juan creates a 2/2 Shark with Flying, a 1/1 Spirit with Flying, and each creature Juan controls gets another +1/+1 until the end of the turn. Juan targets Narset and has it deal damage to one of Ryan's Golem tokens. Each of Juan's opponents also get a poison counter. They move to damage, and Hunter takes another 5 points of commander from Narset, going down to 30 life. Juan then passes the turn. Hunter untaps, draws, and then plays a Plains as land for turn. He then taps 4 mana in total, and he casts his commander, Ixhel, Scion of Atraxa. Ixhel is a vigilant flyer with Toxic 2 that has Corrupted. At the beginning of Hunter's end step, he can exile the top card of his opponent's library so long as that player has 3 or more poison counters. Hunter can then cast that spell, using mana of any color to do so at a later time. However, with no other plays, Hunter passes the turn to Ryan. Ryan untaps, draws, and plays a Path of Ancestry as land for turn, which enters tapped. Ryan then taps the Soul Ring and an island to cast Master of Ethereum. This cast triggers Rashmi, and Ryan chooses to exile the top card of Juan's library. God's Willing gets exiled, and Ryan decides to cast it, targeting Cory to give it protection from black. Ryan then scries 1 to the top and creates a treasure token from his commander. Ryan then moves to combat and attacks Hunter with Cory, and for some reason sends his golem towards Cory. Cory blocks the golem with Miirym, which results in the golem's death. Since Kaikar has protection, Hunter can declare no blocks, loses 6 life, and goes down to 24. Ryan then passes the turn to Cory. Cory untaps, draws, and plays a forest as land for turn. Cory then passes the turn to Juan, making no further plays. Juan untaps, draws, and plays a Sundown Pass as land for turn, which enters untapped since he controls 2 or more other lands. Juan then moves to combat, declares Narset, a Flying Shark token, and Kaikar as an attacker, attacking Ryan. Narset triggers on attack, and Juan casts God Willing from his graveyard. This cast triggers Typhoon, Kaikar, and his creature's Prowess. Juan creates a 1/1 Flying Shark token, a 1/1 White Spirit token, and Juan's creatures also get +1/+1 until the end of the turn. Juan targets Narset, giving it protection from blue, and scries 1 to the bottom. Ryan declares his food token creature as a blocker against Narset, and Gilded Goose as a blocker against Kaikar. At the end of declared blockers, Ryan decides to tap 2 mana and the Goose to create a food token. Players move to damage. Narset and the Goose will die, and Ryan will take 3 life, going down to 33. During Juan's second main phase, he taps a total of 6 mana to recast Narset and passes to Hunter. Hunter untaps, draws, and plays an Exotic Orchard as land for turn. Hunter then taps 4 mana to cast a Grafted Exoskeleton. Juan makes a deal with Hunter that he will not counter the skeleton so long as Hunter attacks Ryan with Ixhel after equipping it to his commander. Hunter accepts this deal, the skeleton resolves, and Hunter equips it to Ixhel, giving it Infect and +2/+2. Following the deal, Hunter moves to combat and attacks Ryan with Ixhel. Ryan has no flying blockers and takes 4 points of commander damage, getting 4 more poison counters. And thanks to Ixhel having Toxic 2, Ryan receives another 2 poison counters, for a total of 6 this turn. Ryan then decides to sack his food token to gain 3 life before Hunter's end step. During Hunter's end step, Ixhel triggers and exiles the top card of Ryan's library, allowing Hunter to cast it at a later time. Ryan untaps, draws, and taps 4 to cast a Whirler Rogue. On cast, this triggers Ryan's commander, and he chooses to exile the top card of Hunter's library and creates a treasure token. Ryan then casts the card exiled, which is Vraska's Fall. However, with Fall on the stack, Cory decides to give Ryan an offer he can't refuse, countering Vraska's Fall, giving Ryan 2 treasure tokens. The Whirler resolves, enters the battlefield, and Ryan creates 2 Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. Ryan then activates the Whirler's effect, tapping 2 creatures, and makes his very powerful artifact unblockable. Ryan attacks Juan with it, and Juan has no choice but to take 9 life, going down to 22. Ryan then taps 4 in total, and he casts Vidalkian Humiliator with nothing else. Ryan passes the turn to Cory. During Ryan's end step, however, Cory activates the Orb of Dragonkind. Sacrificing the orb, he looks at the top 7 cards of his library and chooses a Atarka World Render and puts it in his hand. Cory untaps, draws, and you'll never guess it, but he decides to cast Atarka World Render. When Atarka enters the battlefield, it triggers Miirym, and Cory creates a non-legendary copy of Atarka. Cory decides to move to combat and attacks Juan with Miirym. Atarka triggers giving Miirym double strike, but Juan declares one of his spirit tokens as a blocker, which dies in combat. Cory, feeling a little disappointed, he passes the turn. Juan untaps, draws, and taps a red to cast Gamble, which triggers Typhoon, Kaikar, and Prowess. Juan creates a 1/1 Flying Shark, a 1/1 Flying Spirit, and Juan's creatures get +1/+1 until the end of the turn. Gamble resolves. Juan searches his library for a card and gives Hunter the honor of choosing which card is discarded at random. Hunter chooses to randomly discard the Third Path Iconoclast, and it goes to the grave. Juan moves to combat, sees there are no good attacks, and then passes the turn to Hunter. Hunter untaps, draws, and plays a Tainted Field as land for turn. Hunter then taps 2 to cast a Plague Stinger. Hunter then taps 4, activating the Clasp, and chooses to give each player another poison counter, as well as puts another -1 counter on Kaikar. Hunter moves to combat, declares Ixhel as an attacker, attacking Cory after making a deal with Ryan to make her unblockable with the Whirler Rogue. Ryan holds up his end of the deal, taps 2 artifacts he controls, and makes Ixhel unblockable. Cory has no choice but to take the damage, and Cory receives 6 more poison counters. Hunter moves to his end step, where Ixhel triggers, and he exiles the top cards of both Ryan and Cory's library. Ryan then untaps, draws, and taps 4 to cast Thopter Spy Network. This cast triggers Rashmi, and Ryan creates a treasure, and he exiles the top card of Cory's library. A Terramorphic Expanse gets exiled, and Ryan decides to play it as his land for turn. However, during editing, we realize that Rashmi does not allow him to play lands, as it specifies he may cast that spell. We apologize for this mistake. Ryan moves to combat, activates the Whirler Rogue, tapping 2 treasures, and makes his big artifact unblockable. Ryan decides to attack Hunter with the big boy, as well as Vidalkian Humiliator, which triggers on attack. Hunter's creatures lose all abilities and become 1/1s. Ryan also declares Cory and 2 Thopters as attackers towards Hunter. Hunter decides to block Vidalkian Humiliator with the Ironclaw Mirror. Players move to damage, and Hunter takes a massive 20, going down to 4 life. Ryan then draws a card since an artifact dealt damage, and he moves to his end step, where he creates a 1/1 Thopter token and passes to Cory. Cory untaps, draws, and then pays 3 to cast Glasspool Mimic. Mimic enters the battlefield as a copy of the Atarka token, which triggers Miirym and creates another copy of Atarka. Cory moves to combat, declares Atarka attacking Hunter, which is a 6/4 with flying and double strike. Cory also decides to attack Ryan with Miirym and the other copy of Atarka. In response to attacks, Ryan taps 2 untapped artifacts he controls and makes the Atarka attacking Hunter unblockable. Ryan declares no blocks. Players move to damage, and Ryan takes a massive 24 thanks to Atarka giving all of Cory's dragons double strike, and goes down to 12 life. Since Atarka couldn't be blocked, Hunter takes lethal damage, going down to 0, which takes him out of the game. Cory decides to pass the turn to Juan. Juan untaps, draws, and then he taps 2 to cast Anticipate. This triggers Typhoon, Kaikar, and Prowess on all of Juan's creatures. Typhoon resolves, and Juan creates a 2/2 Flying Shark. Kaikar resolves, and Juan creates a 1/1 Flying Spirit. Prowess resolves, and Juan's creatures get powered up. Anticipate then resolves. Juan looks at the top 3 cards of his library, adds 1 of them to his hand, and puts the rest on the bottom. Juan then plays a Battlefield Forge's land for turn, and then he moves to combat. Juan declares a Shark token and 4 Spirit tokens as attackers, attacking Ryan. Ryan decides to block the 3/3 Shark with his flyer, and he takes 8 life, going down to 4. Juan then passes to Ryan. Ryan untaps, draws, and moves right to combat. He activates the Whirler Rogue, tapping 2 artifacts, and makes his big boy unblockable. Ryan decides to attack Cory with several creatures. Vidalkin triggers, and Cory's creatures lose all their abilities and become 1/1 until the end of the turn. Cory then taps 3 to cast Beast Within, targeting Ryan's big boy, which is then destroyed, and Ryan gets a 3/3 Beast in its place. Players move to declare blockers, where Cory declares no blocks and takes 15 points of life, going down to 25. Ryan draws a card since a creature he controls dealt damage. Ryan then taps several to cast Everquill Phoenix to get a flyer on board. The cast of this triggers Rashmi, and he exiles the top card of Cory's library and creates a treasure. Ryan decides to cast Demanding Dragon, which was exiled from Cory's library. Demanding Dragon enters the battlefield, and he targets Cory to either sacrifice a creature or lose 5 life. Cory decides to lose 5 life and goes down to 20. Ryan then passes the turn to Cory. Cory untaps, draws, and then plays a Yavimaya Coast as land for turn. He then moves to combat and declares several creatures as an attacker, attacking Ryan. Atarka triggers on attack, giving all of Cory's dragons double strike. Ryan decides to block Miirym with his 5/5. Damage is dealt, and Ryan is taken out of the game thanks to Cory's strong, trampling dragons with double strike. With nothing else, Cory passes the turn to Juan. Juan untaps, draws, and plays an island as land for turn. Juan then taps 1 to cast Path of Exile, targeting the Glasspool Mimic, which is currently a copy of Atarka. Juan creates a 1/1 Flying Shark thanks to Typhoon, a 1/1 Spirit thanks to Kaikar, and Juan's creatures get more powerful thanks to Prowess. Path resolves, exiling the Mimic, and Cory searches for a basic land and puts it on the battlefield tapped. Juan then moves to combat and declares all of his able-bodied creatures as attackers, attacking Cory. Narset triggers on attack, and Juan decides to cast Path of Exile from his grave, targeting Miirym. Juan pays the extra 2 for Miirym's ward cost, and he creates another 1/1 Shark, a 1/1 Spirit, and Juan's creatures get more powerful thanks to Prowess. Path resolves, Miirym gets exiled, and Cory searches his library for another basic land and puts it on the battlefield tapped. They decide to move to declare blockers. Cory looks at his hand, remembering that he had something, and then taps a massive 7 mana to cast Kindred Summons. However, with Kindred Summons on the stack, Juan taps 2, and he casts Negate, which counters summons. Players go to damage, and Cory loses the remaining 20 life he has, taking him out of the game, which makes Juan and Narset our winner for today. I hope you all have enjoyed today's game, and if you have, show some support by leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing to our channel. We plan to bring you a lot more Commander content for you all to enjoy in the future, so stay tuned. This is Juan from the Mana Dorks, and we are tapping out.